Good afternoon. My guest today is a revolutionary whose name in this morning's Times has been bracketed with Marx, Darwin and Freud. Her name is also synonymous with women's liberation. Germaine Greer, welcome to A+.
Thank you.
And we're welcoming you because, of course, you've brought out your new book, Sex and Destiny. And did you ever expect such praise as to be likened with Darwin, Freud, Marx?
No, I didn't actually, and I worried a lot for Faye when she was so generous, because I thought she'd go straight into Sude's corner like a rocket. Not that she would mind that, I'm sure, because all the best people in the country spend a lot of their time in Sude's corner.
Do you mind being in Sude's corner yourself sometimes?
I mind not being in. I don't know if you've noticed, but about the last 6 years or so, since I've been friends with Richard Ingrams, I don't get in anymore, so I think I must have been corrupted by proximity or something. I hope they've started to have a go at me again, and they might intensify it, which will convince me that I'm on the right track.
How have you taken the enormous publicity that you've had? I mean, have you on the whole thought that the publicity has conveyed what you wanted to say in your book, or on the whole do you think it has maligned you?
Well, there's been a certain amount of quite deliberate disinformation, by which I mean that things have been quite consciously misrepresented. The Sunday Times announced that I'd performed some extraordinary volte-face, and they published the serialization always in those terms. Look what she's saying now, isn't this amazing, pathetic, or whatever? And even instructed their readers to write in and tell me that I was wrong. They didn't even tell their readers to write in and say what they thought, but indeed to say that they thought I was barking up the wrong tree. Or
But you had quite sort of keenly felt criticism from women who have said that you have changed, that you have done a terrible reversal and made them worry about what you'd said before and now what you're saying now.
Well, worry is a useless thing to do, but thought is quite a good thing to indulge in from time to time. I don't think there really is any such thing to worry about. I mean, there are quite a few feminists who have said, although they were ignored by the Sunday Times, that they've been talking about these things for a long time, and they usually put it in another way by saying that I'm not saying anything original. I'm not saying anything they haven't already thought of. I'm quite sure that's true. Then there was the sort of criticism that came from the feminists who wrote that composite letter, who seemed to me to have been totally dazzled by the headline, because their argument was that I was blaming women for the fact that there's no fun in child-rearing in our society, and that would be bizarre. I mean, how could I do such a thing? It occurs to me that people don't realise that authors, journalists, reporters don't write the headlines. The headlines are written by people who do nothing but that, and who calculate their headlines in order to get the maximum buzz response, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not.
When I watched you, well, when I didn't watch you, I've read everything that's come out about you since I've started to read the book. Yes, indeed. And, of course, I've also gone back over your cuttings. And the thing is, it's interesting, you know, you have got, obviously, an animal magnetism, right? Now, I don't know if that's a sexist phrase, but you have got it. And wherever you are interviewed, Germaine, you're interviewed with a great, big, wonderful photograph of you.
A great big horrible
Now,
photograph.
it could be Elizabeth Taylor having arrived in London. The kind of photographic exposure you've had is true. And what I was going to ask you is whether it must be very handy to have animal magnetism, if that's what you got, right? From the point of view of being a woman. But how difficult is that for you to cope with as a serious academic?
I don't notice it.
You don't notice it? Well, I mean, it's obviously...
It doesn't occur to me at all. It's funny, because I first read that in the Terry Coleman piece in The Guardian, and I was staggered, especially as he said I shared this obscure quality with Billy Graham. I mean, that gave me a peculiar tingle in some odd places, I must say. But I noticed my sister has something like that. I don't see it in myself, but I see it in my sister. And I think possibly my mother had it. And it's something that I don't know anything about it. I mean, you couldn't, if I was conscious of it, I'd be unbearable, I think. I don't know whether it exists or not.
Now then, when I brought that in order to bring up sex, which I do feel you've changed your mind about myself. Have you not? You have asked a question in the front of your book, and I will give you your words for it, as you'll remember. Why should we erect the model of recreational sex in the public places of all the world? Now, I would say that in the 60s, that's exactly what you did.
Well, it fits us, is the argument. It doesn't fit them. If I change my mind, it's in a rather subtle way and not in anything like the way people think I've changed my mind. I do not think sex is a bad thing. I do not think chastity has anything much to commend it, and celibacy possibly even less. But I also have known all my life that celibates were no madder than other people, and that unlimited sexual activity didn't do a noticeable amount of good to anyone, really. It's been a question of which way you want to live your life. And when I wrote in the 60s, I was really writing about dignity, I suppose. What was happening then was that we had an increase in sexual activity, but women in particular were still devilled by the double standard, and they were still terribly afraid of being called promiscuous.
What, you mean the double standard that a man could but a woman shouldn't unless she was serious or in love or about to marry, or what do you mean?
You see, and it was more complicated than that, because women were supposed to be sexy. They were supposed to be turned on and exciting and all of that. But they were also supposed somehow or other to luck into stable relationships, which is quite a hard thing to do. So that women who were sort of experimenting sexually and being, I suppose, exploited by men at the same time, were internalizing their failures to establish long-term relationships and thinking of themselves as inferior or slags or something like that. And so I tried to draw up some new role models. I mean, one of the pieces that Valerie Grove quoted, for example, in The Standard, was actually, it was called Dr. G, the Day Tripper. And there was a journalist who was called Germaine, and there was this person she was interviewing who was called Dr. G. They were both me. And what Dr. G was doing was, in a rather infantile and sassy way, was trying to describe a kind of role model which was not a little slag, which wasn't somebody who climbed in the ventilator of the lavatory at the Roundhouse so that she could perform certain functions for the lead singer on her knees. I mean, that wasn't... I thought that was a very... undesirable role model to have, and there were no lack of such little girls. Some of them weren't even so little. And then there were the old ladies who were the sort of permanent mates of the stars, who some were important in the lives of the stars and some were obviously indoors, you know, who didn't know what was going on. And then there was a sort of semi-mythical creature called the supergroupie who had her own action, who was intelligent, independent, self-supporting, and who had the kind of scene going that the singers and the stars and everybody else wanted to be involved in. They came to her. She stayed put. She never went backstage. In fact, I even invented a manoeuvre that I called the front-of-house pull, which was getting the lead singer off the stage and down to you, rather than you going around and lurking in the wings. And this was all because Oz was to do with that pop culture. And I could see that women were getting a terrible drubbing by that same culture, and they really had to protest against it in a way that was positive and not negative. I'm not in favour of censorship. I'm not in favour of repression. When it comes to being in favour of restraint, I'm in favour of restraint in exactly the same way that tonight's programme on television about sex will show that restraint has to be used to help people to function sexually at all. If you don't know how to control your sexuality and how to build up psychic tension, you don't know how to make love. I mean, it's just a sort of series of accidents. And it can't be like that.
But did you not? I mean, would you deny that you hadn't given that impression to people? I mean, and really...
But I'm not responsible for their impressions.
Well, aren't you, though,
not
Germaine?
Really, no.
Well, you influenced an awful lot of people. You made some people feel dull because they weren't as sexy and raunchy as you. They made other people feel, my goodness, this is what I must do. I must go out and prove myself as a woman to sex. Yes, a slight responsibility, I'd have thought, for that.
Look, if it comes down to the things I actually did, I mean, apart from being presented by all sorts of people as all sorts of things. I mean, my husband Paul Dufour presented me as a sort of terrible po-faced hypocrite. David Plant comes along and presents me as this woman who sits in the public square at Camucia in Italy with her legs apart, showing her sex organ. I mean, can you imagine what would happen if I'd really done that in Camucia? I mean, I just can't imagine what would have happened.
So you mean a lot of it was made up, a lot of it was made much worse. Well,
but when it comes to what I actually do, people in this country probably don't remember, that I wrote a piece for Playboy in about 1972, for which they hypocritically made me Journalist of the Year, which was called Seduction is a Four-Letter Word. And the argument of the piece was that seduction is worse than rape, because rape, in a way, is a sort of terrible accident. It's like being knocked over by a bus when you're walking on the pavement. But when you are actually ripped off by men whom you're trying to love, and you realise you've been used yet again, you internalise that, and it really eats the soul. It really is terribly damaging. And I wrote a piece that described this phenomenon and said, it ended up saying, if you don't really like us, don't make love to us. Leave us alone. If we say no, believe us and don't talk us out of it. And it also said that before very long, women would start kicking ass and taking names, talking loud and drawing a crowd. In other words, we start to tell what happened. And it's funny that I should have done that, because that was before all these great super groupies came out and said, you know, I went to bed with X and he was terrible, Miss So-and-so who suffered from premature ejaculation, and somebody else who always talked to me as if I was a pig, and so on. And it's all over the centrefolds of the papers, and there's been a lot of red faces since.
But in your book you do maintain, don't you, that sex should be more to do with fertility. You should say no to bad sex, well, certainly, but you should say no. Whereas before it didn't seem to be that message. Haven't you changed slightly towards what you feel? And is it because you're that much older, by the way? And why not? No.
I've never been for bad sex. I've always been against that. I mean, I've always thought that sex was something perfectible. I thought it was very, very funny that the English press should interpret my saying to a 14-year-old, better no sex than bad sex, as saying have no sex at all. As if in England there was only bad sex. If you weren't going to settle for that, you weren't going to get any. I think there's a good deal of truth in the supposition, but that's the situation I'd like to change. Now, you see, what it seems to me we've done, and I certainly in my time was quite active in bringing this about, we've made women sterile so that they are available for a particular kind of sexual interaction.
You made them sterile. I mean, that's
by taking the pill. I mean, temporarily sterile by the pill, or permanently sterile.
But also with some freedom for themselves to be able to choose when they want their babies to.
Well, yes.
To make love without the risk is possibly quite a good thing, isn't it? Mostly.
Well, yes, it is. But we've tended to exaggerate the risk. I mean, I've got girlfriends who are in their 40s who are still worrying about getting pregnant. And they also, at the same time, complain about the lack of attention from their husbands. And I want to say, well, for Christ's sake, how many pills do you have to take? Can we do a cost-benefit analysis here? How many orgasms, how many pills? At a certain point, you've got to say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I just want them to make that calculation. And also, I think that we really did find out pretty quickly that there was a limit to male libido. It happened really very fast, and then everyone turned on the feminists and said, oh, you aggressive women, you know, you've caused this problem of male shyness and inadequacy. We didn't cause that. I mean, what actually happened was when suddenly sex became a social duty, and I think it really did, men realised they couldn't keep up the pace. I mean, men taking you home from dinner parties would say, do you mind if I don't come upstairs for a cup of coffee? And I'd be thinking, I didn't even ask you upstairs for a cup of coffee.
There's a point in your book which I also want to know whether you think that you haven't done a slightly different change to, and why not, by the way, because a lot of, I think a lot of us have gone on what we thought you thought, right? I mean, I know that must always happen in a book.
I think, you know what I think is the single most damaging thing, and perhaps I should have been more careful, but it was such a huge audience. It was 8 million people, 8 million buyers, and something like 22 million readers or something. And that was the Playboy interview, which concentrated on the things that Playboy was interested in. And I wanted to give them a feminist angle on their own philosophy. And I think that was probably read by very many people and gave them a particular view of what I was up to. I mean, The Female Eunuch probably sold about 4 million copies. So 4 million copies against 22 million readers of the Playboy interview, which is probably still rotting away on dentists' tables in waiting rooms and so on. I think that probably made the biggest impact in this context. It didn't on women, of course, but it did, I think, on the sort of jobbing journalists. And it's probably still in the morgues of the newspapers they work for.
You've got in the book, too, that do we dare drive off the matriarch and exterminate the peasantry, right? Now, what you seem to be doing in this book as well is that you are now saying how wonderful motherhood is.
Well, the matriarch isn't just a mother.
Right.
The thing about the matriarch is she's a mother-in-law as well.
Right, but
you see, for us, when we become mothers-in-law, we really have almost no useful function to perform. We're nuisances, universally acclaimed as terrible nuisances. And all the things we've learnt and all the things we know and the things we love to do, such as be involved with our grandchildren, are really not open to us anymore. And I actually think that that won't do. The waste of our older women, even supposing they're in work, what work are they in? And they're generally in drudgery work that they shouldn't be doing. Whenever I see a 55-year-old woman working as a waitress, I want to bang my head against the wall. I mean, I was a waitress when I was 18 and it was hard work, and I can't see myself doing it at 55. It seems to me we have to have alternative roles for older women. We're building up this huge problem of female idleness and anguish.
But they can't all be grandmas, can they? You're not saying that exactly, but an extended part of some family. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, to have some sort of relevance and also some authority, some dignity. There is no dignity in being an old woman in our situation, and we're all going to be old women. And I frankly don't look forward to it. I don't know if you do.
But not at all. I think there's nothing to be said for real old age. I mean, I'm hoping middle age is going to be a nice gallop. but you've said in the past that the mother, the wife, the woman, is the dead heart of a family, spending father's earnings in consumer goods to enhance the environment in which he eats, sleeps, watches telly.
And that's still true.
Yes, but then why are you saying that a peasant can show us what a motherhood is all about? Because that is what I'm gathering from your book.
I don't know.
Am I right?
The peasants are not going to show us anything. We're not going to let them show us anything. We're certainly not about to learn anything from them. The thing about motherhood is that we've turned it into this strange relationship where the mother is isolated with her child and she becomes a problem for the child and the child becomes a problem for her. Her love for the child, which I do not deny, and the enormous love of the child for the mother, which is huge, it'll be the biggest love affair of its whole life, this love is poisoned by the fact they can't escape from each other. They can't escape from each other's attention.
What, the nuclear family is too small for its own health, for its own good?
Certainly too small for women's health, you see. And also I think something that I would have said it then, is that the most important relationship in the nuclear family is not even between husband and wife. It's between husband and his employer. More of his energy and more of his time and more of his loyalty is involved with his employer. And if he's in the executive class, that's more apparent. If he's in America in the executive class, it's obvious. And then the employer begins to interfere in the marriage as well. You've got to, when you go for a job, they're going to do a personality rundown on your mate. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's really a terrible situation, especially as the employer, this is more noticeable in America than here, but it's becoming more the case here, deliberately moves his vassal around in order to break his other ties. His ties to his community, his ties to his own kin, they all become second to his ties to Rank Xerox or ICI or whatever it happens to be. And in that situation, the woman is the principal conduit for spending power. That's her job, is to go out and shop. And I think it's a lousy job.
But what you're really saying is you don't like the Western way of life.
Well, I couldn't live in any other. I'm well aware of that.
So why not?
Well, because I take up too much room. I need enormous quantities of space. I'm so spoilt. I have to be constantly fed with books and media and information and food and drink and so forth. It takes a lot to keep me going. I'm a huge sort of hulk on the world's surface compared to people who live in a much more productive way, that is to say, who are much more self-sufficient.
Yes, but are you not romanticising? Aren't you not romanticising that?
I think I probably am. But the thing is, they get nothing but bad publicity. I mean, to be Indian, even in England, where we actually depend upon an Indian migrant population for many essential services. I mean, I don't know where you go for a bottle of milk at 10 o'clock, but we go to the Indians for a bottle of milk at 10 o'clock at night. That's just one silly way of putting it. It makes it perfectly obvious what I'm saying. what do they read about their countries in the paper? What do they read about their lifestyle? I mean, it's assumed that they're on their way to becoming like us. And I'd hate to be a Muslim child in an English school, but trying to defend my lifestyle against the lifestyle that's being held up. They may come to their own decisions. You know, we all say, oh, arranged marriages, nick, nick, nick. You can't possibly know. That'd be dreadful. That's and so forth. They get no good publicity about that. I'm sure there are schools, by the way, where this is not so, where the Muslim students or Hindu students are able to describe their way of life and their values, and they get some respect for it. But the general pressure is, follow us, do as we do. And when the Asian child says to you, but 1 in 3 of your marriages breaks up, and it's fast becoming 1 in 2 of your marriages breaks up, which is going to mean eventually that everybody gets married twice, I don't want to live that way.
But do they really take any notice of us, really? I mean,
Well,
really, I don't think we're that much of an influence, thank goodness, anymore. I mean,
In
surely
England?
we're not. And do you not?
Oh, yes, we are. The tensions on the English-born children of traditional families are terrible. And you've got a very vocal lobby which has gone completely westernised, and you've got a very silent lobby which still wants to live the way its parents did. No, the pressures are huge. And the pressures are huge even when it comes to what are they going to live in. I mean, we've got Asian families in Leicester and places like that who try to buy row houses one next to the other so they can live together. But they get into trouble with things like rates and taxes and so on. And they can't pool their resources because our tax structure and rating structure won't let them. No, there's tremendous pressure. And when it comes to the subcontinent itself, I mean, one of the most obvious things in India is the existence of English advertising and marketing techniques and American advertising, even though they don't take our products.
And we could go on and on and on and on, but we can't. Thank you very much for talking to me, Dr. Greer.